fellow panelists. We'll wait a couple of minutes for everyone to join us. So good morning. Yes, I always forget about the different time zones. So good morning for me, good afternoon for you. All right, I'll just give it about another 30 seconds or so, just our numbers are still going up. Okay, well, I am going to kick us off if that's good for everyone. Welcome and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the launch of the Breaking Barriers, a Decade of Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship in Canada, which is a new report out today from the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub and the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. My name is Shannon Pestun, and I'm the Senior Advisor of Banking and Finance at the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, which is housed within the Diversity Institute, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am calling in from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina and the Îyârhe Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Our regional hubs and partners across the country similarly gather on the traditional territory of many of Canada's Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. Let us take a moment to recognize the many traditional lands on which we are connecting and acknowledge with gratitude and respect the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose footsteps were first to mark these lands. The Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, or WEKH as we like to call it, works across the country through 10 regional hubs in English and in French to share research on resources for women entrepreneurs in Canada. Drawing on the expertise of a network that includes more than 250 organizations, we also host and support programming that highlights opportunities and best practices for women entrepreneurs and the organizations that support them. Breaking Barriers, a Decade of Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship in Canada was released today from WEKH and the CCAB. This new report explores women-owned Indigenous businesses, how the sector is growing, and takes a preliminary look at their unique approaches to innovation and use of traditional knowledge. Today, we'll hear highlights from the research from CCAB's Director of Research, Samantha Morton, and Research Coordinator, Kaira, Jakobsh. And then we will follow it up with a panel featuring a few incredible Indigenous women entrepreneurs who will share their experiences with us. I'd like to just quickly introduce Samantha. Samantha is an influential not-for-profit leader with a demonstrated ability to shape policy through an in-depth research on Indigenous economies in Canada. In addition to leading the research department at the CCAB, Samantha serves on a number of high-level advisory boards and committees. Currently, she serves on the Gender and Trade Advisory Group and the Indigenous Working Group on International Trade and Global Affairs Canada. She also served on the Federal Indigenous COVID-19 Response Task Force. Welcome, Samantha. And also joining Samantha is Kaira, Research Coordinator at the CCAB, who helps to manage the portfolio on women's entrepreneurship. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you now, Samantha and Kaira. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shannon, for that kind introduction. Hello, everybody. I will just give it a minute or so Kaira can start sharing her screen. We've prepared a brief presentation on the research findings for you today. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our discussion. My name is Samantha, and I'm here with my colleague Kaira from the CCAB. I first want to acknowledge that Kaira and I are speaking to you from our home offices today, which are on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We'll try to keep this presentation quite brief, short and sweet for you today to allow time to hear from this amazing panel of Indigenous women entrepreneurs. Now, before I get into the findings, I'd like to provide a little bit of background on CCAB and our research department. So since 1982, CCAB has been committed to the full participation of Indigenous peoples in the Canadian economy. We're a national not-for-profit with over 1,000 Indigenous and non-Indigenous business members across all sectors and regions in Canada. CCAB provides programming and initiatives to support, connect, and celebrate Indigenous businesses. Now, all of this work is backed by data-driven research. The research team at CCAB has been recognized by the OECD as the gold standard for Indigenous business data in Canada. Our team provides custom designed research reports and projects to suit individual needs, as well as tackle key policy issues in Canada. Some current research topics that we explore are procurement of Indigenous businesses, Indigenous trade and export, Indigenous participation in technology, innovation, and the future of work, community economic development, and most recently, of course, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and gendered analysis of Indigenous business data, which brings me to my introduction of the report. So as Shannon mentioned, we're thrilled to be able to present this new research report to you today in partnership with WEKH. Now, this report highlights research conducted by CCAB on Indigenous women in business over the last 10 years. The report uses data from CCAB's Promise and Prosperity, our Aboriginal business surveys, collected in both in 2010, 2016, and 2019. Now, I'll let Kaira dive into some of the details, but I wanted to just acknowledge some of the main key findings from this report. So from the data, we found that Indigenous women-owned businesses have seen incredible growth over the last decade, with a significant increase in average number of employees, the number of businesses that are reporting revenues over $1 million, and a significant increase in incorporation rates as well. The report also provides a comparison of women-owned businesses to Indigenous men-owned businesses. Notably, we found some differences there. Women-owned businesses are more likely to have innovated by introducing new products, services, or processes. They're more likely to export to the US, and are more likely to use traditional knowledge or traditional cultural expressions, TCE, in their business. The report also explores existing barriers and heightened challenges throughout the pandemic, including one of the main challenges, access to capital, but other challenges such as digital infrastructure and unauthorized use of traditional knowledge or TCE. Now, at this point, I'd like to hand things over to Kaira, as she is really the brains behind this whole operation.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to everyone else joining us today. I'll just start by adding a little bit of context about the research and the report. So the data was collected, as Sam mentioned, from 3 surveys, and each of those had over 1,000 participants. And because the latest survey was collected before the COVID-19 pandemic, I'll discuss a few findings from an additional survey, our 2020 COVID-19 Indigenous Business Survey. So many sources have shown that the effects of the pandemic are felt differently by various people and communities, and this is true of Indigenous communities and Indigenous women specifically. So looking at the Indigenous women entrepreneurs in our recent survey, we found that women entrepreneurs were more likely to have experienced a very negative impact from COVID-19 at 62% compared to 53% of men. Additionally, women were more likely to have experienced a drop in revenue of over 50%, and women-owned businesses are more concentrated in the service industries, which appear to be particularly vulnerable to impacts of the pandemic. Finally, over a third of women-owned businesses have no lending relationships compared to 25% of men, which further exacerbates a key barrier for Indigenous business growth, which is access to capital. So Indigenous entrepreneurs typically prefer sole proprietorships, but we found that rates are higher among women-owned businesses at 60% compared to 48% of men-owned businesses. However, you can see here that women-owned businesses are increasingly incorporating their businesses at a rate of 17% in 2010, up to 21% in 2019. While this growth is really optimistic, we've also found that 30% of Indigenous men-owned businesses are incorporated and 26% of Canadian women-owned businesses are incorporated. So hopefully we can continue to see this upward trend of Indigenous women incorporating their businesses. Women-owned businesses also tend to be small, 42% hiring compared to 55% from the study that even though women-owned businesses are smaller, even though they're smaller, the rate of businesses with employees has grown significantly in the last 10 years, and it's nearly doubled from 23% in 2010 to 42% in 2019. Another really optimistic finding is that the percent of Indigenous women-owned businesses experiencing revenue growth has risen from 32% in 2010 to 41% in 2019. And conversely, you can see that the businesses experiencing a decrease in revenue has gone down from 25% in 2010 to 15% in 2019. And in some of our recent surveys, we've started asking participants about innovation. So in this case, we don't have the comparison for year by year, but what we found is that in 2019, women-owned businesses were more likely to innovate by introducing new products and services or by introducing new processes. And on the other hand, men-owned businesses are more likely to spend on research and development or introduce new technologies. So I'll pass it back to Sam now to discuss our findings on traditional knowledge and some next steps that we found from this report.
Thank you, Kaira. So a special subset of the report focused on Indigenous women-owned businesses and their use of traditional knowledge or traditional cultural expression. This data, as Kaira pointed out for the innovation slide, comes from our 2019 research. And the main findings are that 73% of women-owned Indigenous businesses say that they use either traditional knowledge or traditional cultural expression in their businesses. Now, this is actually more widespread than among men-owned businesses, which the usage is around 55%. Now, of those businesses that use TK or TCE, 1/4 of women-owned businesses have intellectual property or IP protections. And notably, more women-owned businesses with TK or TCE have reported unauthorized use of these properties, more so compared to their men-owned counterparts. So to conclude, I just wanted to let everybody know that the report is on our website as well as on WEKH's website. You can find it on the CCAB website at CCAB Research and Recent Publications. And what you can see on this last slide is a series of recommendations that the report has made to really support the advancement and the growth of Indigenous women-owned businesses, both throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, but also into the recovery periods. Some of the most notable recommendations that I'll bring your attention to are the first recommendation. So apply a gender lens to future research on Indigenous business, COVID-19 impacts, and programs to support Indigenous women entrepreneurs. Obviously, we know that there are unique strengths and challenges that Indigenous women entrepreneurs face, and programs and research needs to be designed with that in mind. We also have to ensure that there's equitable financial support and funding mechanisms in place for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. And lastly, we need to redefine intellectual property mechanisms in Canada to be more inclusive and protective of Indigenous traditional knowledge and traditional cultural experience. We can't move forward with the traditional Western system and definitions of IP, which put Indigenous businesses and communities at a distinct disadvantage. when it comes to protecting their traditional knowledge or their traditional cultural expression. To move forward in a good way, we must work with Indigenous businesses and communities. The Government of Canada must work with Indigenous businesses and communities to develop a definition and methods of protection that are relevant and respectful to Indigenous cultural traditions. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you so much to both Sam and to Kaira for the insights in the report. I had the opportunity to get a sneak peek at it yesterday, and I'm looking forward to everyone being able to see what's in that report. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Teara Fraser, who is the LEO and founder of Iskwew and the Raven Institute. Teara is a proud Métis bridge builder, commercial pilot, and the former CEO of Kesik Aerial Survey, an air operation she built up from the ground up. She's an aviation trailblazer and the first Indigenous woman to launch an airline in Canada. Teara continues to soar to new heights in uncharted territories. Welcome, Teara. Next, I'd like to welcome Patrice Mousseau, who is the CEO and founder of Satya Organic Skincare. She started her company in her kitchen when her 8-month-old daughter was diagnosed with eczema. Today, Satya is available in over 800 stores across Canada. And with each purchase, funding goes to support environmental projects in developing countries. Welcome, Patrice. I'd like to next introduce Jenn Harper, an award-winning social entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Cheekbone Beauty Cosmetics, a digitally native direct-to-consumer brand that is helping Indigenous youth see themselves in a beauty brand while creating a sustainably socially conscious segment of the beauty industry. Jenn has appeared on CBC's Dragon's Den and in 2019 was named Woman of the Year by Chatelaine magazine. Welcome, Jenn. And last, I'd like to welcome Ashley Richard, a proud Indigenous woman from Winnipeg with family from Pine Creek First Nation and Camperville, Manitoba. Her spirit name is Forever Woman, and her life purpose is to follow in the footsteps of her grandmother, Mary Richard. Currently, she is the National Indigenous Outreach and Partnership Development Lead at the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. Welcome, Ashley. As you can see, our panelists know firsthand what it means to break through barriers, and I'm looking so forward to having them share their experiences with us today. We will have about 45 minutes of Q&A time at the end, so please make sure that you put your questions inside the Q&A chat. If you have any questions that we don't have the chance to answer today, we will certainly try and get back to them in response at a later date. So without further ado, let's get started. Ashley, I'm going to start with you. We see from CCAB's research that Indigenous women entrepreneurs are a competitive part of the Indigenous economy and an asset to their communities. Can you share more about their impact and how the entrepreneurial landscape is changing for Indigenous women?
Mm-hmm. There's a saying, when you support Indigenous women, you support the entire community. I think that this report and other research reports that have been done on the impact of Indigenous women's entrepreneurship show that Indigenous women create jobs and education opportunities for their communities. And while they're more likely to have a smaller staff, in this report, we have data that shows they're more likely to have 100% Indigenous staff, which only boosts the knowledge and growth of their local community. Another interesting statistic that was highlighted in this report was the incorporation of traditional knowledge. When you read the report, you'll see that 73% of Indigenous women who own businesses say they use either traditional knowledge or traditional cultural expressions in their business. That's so powerful because not only by supporting Indigenous women are you boosting the entire Canadian economy in general, but you're also helping to preserve Indigenous culture. I think some trends that we're seeing now that are changing for Indigenous women is, like this report said, despite barriers and challenges, Indigenous women's entrepreneurship is growing across the country, and that means that there's an ever-growing number of role models that young women can look up to, and the power of role models really can't be underestimated.
Yeah, such a great point. We'll get to role models a little bit later. And of course, we've got so many great role models on this panel today. I want to put this question out to all of our entrepreneurs. One thing that continues to come up in all the research that we see is the impact of access to financial capital and how Indigenous women continue to face barriers when accessing capital. Can you share with us how you were able to overcome this barrier? And what advice do you have for Indigenous women entrepreneurs who are considering looking at external financing as they go down their entrepreneurial journey? Jenn, maybe I can start with you.
Sorry, figuring out how to unmute myself in 2020. I should have figured that out by now. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's really broad and big, and there's lots to sort of open up here. But I think what's really important for a lot of entrepreneurs is it's about the idea, or I think the concept that you're bringing to the market. No one's going to give you money unless it's really damn good, really is the bottom line, unless it's something that doesn't yet exist the way that you see it in the market. So that innovation piece has to be massive when you're asking for capital or looking for capital. But I have in my notes here on that question, like grind and hustle. For 3 years, I worked a full-time job to pay to build Cheekbone Beauty without taking capital from anywhere or anybody. I wanted to prove to myself that the business had a right to exist before going to get capital. But there is a lot of opportunities. And so looking back, there were different little avenues or pockets of cash we could go after with all sorts of different organizations across the country. So it is there. It's about, again, that would be included in that grind and hustle when you're going to look for it. That takes time, effort, and work, and it'll take you away from the project that you're working on. But it's really important to understand that I fully believe that your idea, or when you're going to go ask for money, you better have a really great idea.
Thank you for that. Teara, how can you add to the conversation and help other entrepreneurs who are aspiring potentially to be looking at external capital? What was your journey there?
Oh, and I just love everything Jenn, I always love everything Jenn says, but yeah, does your business have a right to exist? Like, are you doing it well? Are you innovating? How are you bringing yourself out into the world, your product, your service, and how are you just doing it awesomely? I think access to capital is such a huge challenge. 3% of women are accessing venture capital, and the number of Indigenous women, of course, is very small within that. So, I mean, how did I overcome that barrier? I too, especially in my current business, Iskwew, wanted to, I'm 100% owner of this business. And so wanting to stay aligned with myself, aligned with, how carefully I want to, or if I do at all, enter into any relationships with, those that may be investing. And I'll tell you about how I did overcome it in my first business, CCAB Aerial Survey, which, I mean, the fact that someone gave me a loan at that time, when I think back, is just incredible. And I had a good banking relationship. I had a banker that believed in my project and went above and beyond and did everything that she could to get that first loan that helped to move on. And then, grateful to also get support from Tabatha Aboriginal Capital Corporation. And I think that there's more that can be done around the AFIs, the Aboriginal Financial Institutions, to create more ease around accessing money. And then the last thing I'll say is being part of SheEO, which is doing things differently around how we access money, how we are able to do that on our own terms, is also, I think, a model for all of us going forward. They got some stuff figured out for sure.
Yeah, they're doing some exceptional things over there. And I love that you said that you had a relationship with your banker. And I think, that building that relationship is really important because you want somebody to be able to go to bat for you. So I'm glad that you brought that comment up as well. Patrice, let's talk about your journey to accessing capital and what advice you'd have for entrepreneurs who are looking to potentially follow in your footsteps.
Well, first off, I would say I would probably avoid the top three big banks out there. You're not going to have a personal relationship with any of those guys. I would recommend talking to your local credit union. Out here in BC, we have Van City and Coast Capital, and I literally have my banker's cell phone number. Like, those are the kinds of relationships that we're talking about. Unfortunately, you're not going to necessarily get the attention that you need from some of these larger banks. The banks and venture capital, as Teara mentioned, the percentage of venture capital that actually comes to women and Indigenous women is just almost, non-existent. So I think it's awesome. And Jenn's mentioning, you got to have a great business, you got to hustle, absolutely. But if we're at the bottom of a mountain with a white guy, we're carrying an extra 200 pounds and we're trying to keep up pace, right? So let's just recognize that we need the supports to be able to take that weight off so that we can actually compete with these great ideas and these incredible innovations that Indigenous people, and in particularly, I think Indigenous women are doing right now.
Thank you. Great comments from you as well. I want to just talk about the CCAB report talks about the impact of COVID-19 on women entrepreneurs. And I'm hoping that we can ask you the same. How has COVID-19 impacted your business? And Jenn, I'll maybe start with you.
Yeah, like everyone else, I guess the early stages were really worrisome. You're concerned. What does this mean? For us as a business, we had just launched our first product that we went to formulation with our own chemist, and that was launching in March. And of course, that COVID changed all of that. So it dramatically changed the way we were launching products and marketing them to the public. And launch parties and launch events, all of those things were canceled. And then as time trickled on, we really had an issue with supply chain. So, we were working on this foundation that we are using planned agri waste for in all of 2019 and into 2020. And in 2020, our supplier or our vendor that we're working with on that project completely shut down operations because of COVID. So, we intended to launch that at the end of this year. And of course, that did not happen. And now it won't happen until the end of 2021. So there's so many variables that really got scary in the early stages, but it really, as much as and dramatic as those impacts have been, I feel like we have just been able to, as a business and as a brand, really stop and think about what we're doing clearly, take time to focus, reevaluate, assess all of our plans and visions for the future. And so we stopped and we made some big pivots. We're a lipstick brand. Everybody is wearing freaking masks. What were we doing? And so back in May and June, we started working on our eye Sustain Eyes, so vegan clean cosmetics that will come out in February 2021. So it was just getting really creative and acting fast and quickly and making decisions under pressure helped us be able to launch this new product that we'll come out with shortly. And, in conjunction with COVID, we experienced just dramatic growth this year because of movements, social movements like Black Lives Matter. We were already a business. As you introduced us, we're digitally native. We lived online. This is what we did. This is where we thrived. So we were just able to. I cannot believe how many people this year are buying lipstick. And when people are wearing masks, but they did continue to support us. So we've actually, unlike many businesses, experienced massive growth this year, and are scaling at phenomenal rates to the point where we're building a lab at this moment. I just hired a full-time cosmetic scientist chemist that is joining our team, coming from major beauty brands. He's worked for the last 15 years and already developed incredible eco-friendly products. So we're so excited to welcome him to our team. So COVID, as much as there's been challenges, we internally made great pivots and have experienced phenomenal growth.
I'm loving watching the comments of people saying that they're wearing your lipstick during this time. And so that's fantastic. Teara, how about you? How has COVID-19 changed your business?
Yeah, so starting an airline, and I mean, by starting, I mean, we have one small airplane to start, a humble start, but a very big vision. But certainly starting an air operation to begin with is super challenging. And I can tell you that in March, right before all this happened, I was at the CEO Summit in tears. And I was like, it's okay, you've made it to this point, you've made it through the winter. You know, it's a long process to get an air operation up literally into the air. And, you know, I said to myself at the end of February, it's okay, Teara, like it literally can't get any harder than this. You've got so much work booked in the spring and in the summer, and like you've made it. You're gonna be all right. It can't get any harder than this. Gee whiz. And then and then yeah, COVID. So, you know, aviation and tourism, which is me, has been extraordinarily hard hit, if not the hardest hit industry. So it has been devastating to Iskwew Air and to the entire aviation and aerospace industry that we need. You know, we're not just, this industry isn't just taking travelers on a sunny trip, right? Our medical ecosystem, our how we get Jenn's lipstick delivered, how, you know, how we, aviation is somewhat invisible, but is supporting so much of our larger systems. So devastated. The answer, quick answer, long answer, is completely devastated. And there was a point where I thought, I don't know if I can make it through this. I don't know how to make it through this as a startup in this wildly weird world that we're living in. I mean, how do I don't have any customers, but we did a couple of things. So, you know, at that point where I thought, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And then at a later point, sometimes it's in the decisions you make. And I said, you know what, that's actually not going to be the story that we're going to tell. The story that we're going to tell is that Métis lady who was starting an airline, and then COVID was here and she didn't know if she was going to make it. And not only did she make it, but Iskwew Air went on to thrive and to grow and to be in service to communities. And that's the story that we're going to hear. So we stayed operating the whole time because I wanted to be able to help however we could with what we had. And when some of the airlines stopped operating, I mean, Iskwew Air, the whole reason why it exists is to, you know, say how can we be in service to, in particular, Indigenous communities, Indigenous tourism, remote communities. And so we stayed operating to ensure that we could be of service however we could. So we did start a fundraising campaign called Airlift to bring essentials and care packages into Indigenous communities. We have this incredible circle, the Lift Circle of Indigenous Women Entrepreneurs. We use the funds that we raised to buy from some of these Indigenous women entrepreneurs and deliver care packages. We're doing another run to Northern Vancouver Island just on Saturday. And I'll also share, you know, alongside Jenn, there's been an invitation to really have a good think about things in this time. And one of the absolute gifts is realizing Iskwew Air's role as a bridge between traditional air transportation, because we need airplanes right now, and the sustainable transportation of the future, and has also accelerated some other opportunities and thoughts about who do we really want to be in this, and who do we want to be in the world. And I'm really excited about stepping into this area of advanced air mobility, where we can look at an air transportation system that is centered on equity, resilience, and most importantly, sustainability. And I'm determined to to create the conditions where women, non-binary, Indigenous peoples are leading in this innovative space, and disrupting our entire industry and reimagining it, rematriating it, and rebuilding it, a place where everybody belongs and everyone is served. So thank you so much.
So much great insight there. There's some words that really clung to me. Rematriate, such a great word. Gift, another great word. And I remember talking to another entrepreneur once who said, like, what if this is the single most greatest moment of opportunity? And if we look at what the gifts are, even in the hard times, trying to find those to rise above. I love it. Patrice, I'm going to turn it over to you. How has business changed for you since COVID-19 came into view?
Sure. So one of the things, and we actually had we were actually well set up to deal with COVID. We've always been a very decentralized business. We don't run Satya out of offices. People run it out of their own homes on their own time. The people who are employed in our company were all either like stay-at-home moms or people who didn't necessarily fit into a 9-to-5. So when COVID hit, I mean, we were nothing changed for us as far as the way our business ran, which was great. Of course, my product, Satya, although created for eczema originally, has been used for so many other things, and COVID hands and mask irritation have been added to that list. So our sales have again gone quite significantly up. And we have a lot of frontline workers that are using our product now, and we've donated to several hospitals as well. So COVID has been good in some ways. I would also, in recommending to people about that decentralization in your own company, finding ways to operate and knowing where you are vulnerable. Our vulnerability has been supply chain. We have had some issues, for example, getting our calendula flowers. The price of the calendula has more than tripled since COVID hit, because there's no one to go into the fields to harvest the flowers because they can't social distance. So that's been difficult for sure. But really, it is a time to sit back, look where your weaknesses are, and to try and come back with a better, stronger company. Because, the people who make it through this are going to be in a really good position once we're able to start operating normally again.
Thank you all. Such great wisdom in your commentary, and thanks too for your vulnerability, because it's often hard to talk about the time that we're in and how that has had an impact on us. And so thank you for sharing. As I was getting ready for today, I was thinking about our own grandmothers who came before us as innovators, and how innovation, invention, and entrepreneurship has always been a part of our Indigenous communities. And although it's often overlooked in the mainstream discourse, innovation is deeply embedded in Indigenous communities. And I want to explore how you as Indigenous women entrepreneurs are using traditional knowledge and cultural expression that was talked about in the WEKH and CCAB report, how you're using that in your business in an innovative way. I'm going to start with Teara.
Thank you. Yeah, I really had to think about this question. And, I suppose it starts with the name, Iskwew Air. Iskwew is a Cree word for woman. And I chose that fairly boldly, certainly in a very male-dominated industry. as an active reclamation of language, reclamation of matriarchal leadership, and reclamation of womanhood. And so it starts there with language, and I'm excited about our protocols around honoring and acknowledging the territories that we fly into, by knowing where we're going, sharing with our guests as we enter into the territory. And, you know, it also started earlier. Actually, I'm just having a thought now. Of course, this is part of it. You know, only, 9 days after I bought the airplane, we had a blessing ceremony where we asked the Musqueam people for their blessing, for their permission to do business on their territory. Now, it caused a little bit of confusion because many people thought that was the launch, because they don't understand what a blessing ceremony is. You don't wait until you're ready to launch to ask for permission from the territory to do your business. Indigenous tourism, the whole idea for Iskwew Air was born over a decade ago, wanting to do our part to serve Indigenous tourism for those communities that choose that for their communities. We wanted to be able to support the elevation of language and culture in community, how we could by connecting travelers there. And then things like in September, we signed the Tribal Parks Alliance with the Cleoquiot First Nation, where we have an agreement about how we share benefits, where we be in reciprocity when we're entering into their territory. And we'd certainly like to do more of that. And I think simply by being an Indigenous woman-led, I mean, maybe this is presumptuous, I don't know, but this is what I think. Just by being an Indigenous woman-led organization or venture, you're just naturally weaving into everything you do Indigenous worldview, the way you be and see and do. And so it's woven, so it's visible, it's things that we can, talk about and that are, tangible, but it's also just part of the beautiful tapestry of everything that we do. And I'll just make one other comment on that. So even when we were working with the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And recently, and you'll hear more about this, I'm advocating with many friends for hashtag SDG 0, which is, we think that there should be another Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 0, which is Indigenous voiced worldview and wisdom. And what I love about the 0 is that it's like the sacred circle around all the other SDGs. And that's another way of bringing this important way of being into our businesses.
You're getting some good comments there in the chat around that. And I thank you for talking about just our Indigenous ways of knowing. Jenn, what about you? How are you using our traditional ways of knowing and being into your business to drive innovation?
Yeah, so there's lots, and it's a really, really layered process. From the beginning, the whole concept of creating a business that was more about giving back, sitting in Sephora's boardroom a few times now and explaining to them that the Indigenous definition of success is about what we give back to our communities, not at all about what we attain for ourselves. A lot of puzzled faces in that room when we're trying to explain that concept to that world. And it's also, the entire idea of business is colonial and capitalistic, right? It really is. There's no arguing that. But how can we reframe that? How can we restructure? How can we rebuild? Well, it starts at the foundation, much like any wonderfully built anything. The foundation is solid. And so as a company, we've taken a stand to think pre-1492, which it very simply means there's no mention of faith-based holidays. that were brought to Turtle Island pre that time. So we're like going way, 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 way back. It's been an adventure and an exciting challenge because it's reframing how we think about everything that exists right now and how businesses operate in 2020. And so we started with learning more about language, right? That learning more about our language is the key to understanding who our ancestors were and who we are truly as a people. And when we break apart Indigenous words, specifically all I know about is Anishinaabe-Moan. The definitions are very detailed and defined. And you know, one great example is just for us as a business, as a brand, what we're looking at is even just the word for creator. It is broken down into several parts of the one who made everything. Like that's what the Anishinaabe word means. So we do a lot of we spend a lot of time sitting around literally defining Anishinaabe words to figure out what that means for our business and our brand. And so, you know, we launched Sustain lipsticks. Every shade in that collection is the word for land in another Indigenous language. And there is 7,000 globally. So, I mean, we're never going to have that many lipsticks, but we've chosen a select few that we will name after different nations and groups of people, and really blending like this concept of even the scientific method that's comes from Western science, right? Like it's that concept of test, retest, test, retest, test, retest. Whereas then when you marry that with an Indigenous wisdom, that is a concept that this again, many people in business in today's day and age don't have an understanding of actually what it means to have a relationship with a tree or anything that is living or comes from nature, and the ultimate respect that garnets, right? Like, so this question's massive. I probably could go on for a couple hours because I've been neck deep in research and development in building all of these new products and innovation projects that Cheekbone Beauty is working on at the moment. But we're taking that concept, life cycle thinking, from harvest, who, how, but what, and being like, you know, there's so much, we're in a space where that word sustainability gets tossed around, eco-friendly, green, and half of the time people have, you know, they're falling for these blanket marketing statements without truly understanding what all of those concepts really mean. And as Indigenous people, it is innately in us, it's in our genealogy to truly understand that, and it's up to us at this moment in history to actually teach the Western culture what that really, really means.
Great answer. Again, language so important. And Patrice, how about you? How are you using traditional knowledge and cultural expression in your business?
I mean, the obvious, right? Like I'm using traditional medicines in my product. Obviously, we're involved with community, giving back to the community, making sure that we are not harming anyone in our practices, be it the people we work with, the planet. We are all connected. This idea of a circular economy is very important to Satya, and it drives a lot of what we do. In fact, the name Satya, it means to find truth. So I think, but that's as Jenn mentioned, that's inherent in being, I think, an Indigenous woman, especially in business. That it's just ingrained. It's inherent in what we do. And one thing that I find quite interesting is that the business structures that exist today, they're looking for new ones because they don't work anymore. These old systems, these old way of doing things have, you know, they're recognizing that it's only one perspective, one view. And the way I sort of demonstrate that is that, you know, there's the hierarchy, that the system that's always been for colonial business. But as we as Indigenous people, we all sit at a table, right? We sit at this round table and everyone has a voice. Everyone has something to bring to that table. And that's what makes a strong business, having everyone's perspectives. So if anything, I think we as Indigenous people are ahead of the curve, and we do have so much to teach. And we are already doing everything that everyone else is struggling to do for marketing. That's just who we are. It's not separate. It's all part of the whole of who we are as Indigenous people, I think.
Thank you. I just want to circle back to language, and Jenn, I want to go back to you because your language is very specific in your naming convention. how has language even changing the way non-Indigenous women view your products and your company?
Yeah, so we're very sly here. I mean, from the beginning, I'm selling lipstick, pretty fun product, right? But at the even at the beginning, I wanted to get people to talk about or understand, the social issues that were still impacting Indigenous people today. And so now we've uh, reincorporated that into our naming of lipsticks and really bringing out Indigenous words and trying to teach people those words and how to say them. It's a challenge for even Indigenous people to say these words. I'm struggling all the time when I'm learning, and so we thought, why not connect with our non-Indigenous community, our allies, and help them learn the language of the people that were here before them. And for us, then not only, I feel like I am certainly more connected to Anishinaabe Moan, but now as a team, we're always adding other nations' language in as well. So we as a team can learn more about our cousins and brothers and sisters around Turtle Island and share that then with our community. And I feel like it's truly been a thread of connectivity, that's for sure. Like we get so many great comments and feedback from our community about these little language lessons that we're having when it comes to lipstick, and people really want to know how to say them. We're trying to, when I think about innovation and everything that we do as a brand, so not only in the sort of the R&D portion of the actual products that we're making, we're really technology savvy here at Cheekbone Beauty as well. So we're, as much as we're making this new foundation, we're also working on how to work on this app that we want to help people shade match with doing selfies from their phones versus us having to shade match them in person, which won't exist in the near future anyway, as we see the beauty industry shifting. So we're always incorporating technology. So now we're looking at voiceover on social media and on our website, how they can learn to actually say the words and pronounce them correctly as well.
Oh, I love that. And I know you, and thank you for saying it's hard even for Indigenous people, because I have the same challenge. So thank you for letting us all off the hook and knowing that it's all, it is difficult to pronounce some of these words. So thank you. Teara, you've been recognized as a real world Wonder Woman. What was that moment like for you, and how has it changed your view on you? You are a role model for Indigenous women. How has that changed how you see yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. Every time, and I say this every time too, my cheeks get really hot when we talk about this. I am still surprised and, I don't know, in awe and very humbled around being named in this DC Comics Wonder Woman anthology. And I mean, it feels, I'm the only Canadian, and like people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and AOC. AOC is people have asked me, who do you want to hang out with? It's AOC for sure, and because she's just fierce. But that's what the women in this anthology is all about. Is Wonder Woman stands for justice, and so each of those incredible women is standing for justice, ecological justice, social justice, racial justice, economic justice. And I suppose what I want most to amplify is like the everyday heroes, like all the people that are real superheroes, that are standing for the things that are important, standing for the things that matter. And it's that I want to amplify. And being a role model feels or being called a role model, even, I don't know, that, and even those, I don't know, weird words seem weird to say, but I don't know, it feels very like a really big honor and also a really big responsibility. But all I can do is just be myself and just do my best to love and lift, which I do, just love everybody and wear my big love buttons and be proud of the fact that not only does love belong in business and belong everywhere, but that, you know, the absence of that is a system that's not built for humans and just simply isn't going to work.
I love that. All about the love. And Patrice, I'm going to send this question over to you. But you went from starting in your kitchen to now being in over 800 stores across Canada. What advice can you share with us about taking risk in entrepreneurship?
Well, if you're risk adverse, entrepreneurship is not for you. It's scary. And sometimes you have to put blinders on and ignore the risks that you're taking and just jump. It's not easy, obviously, but yeah, you really have to be okay with the fact that you're going to fail. What is it? Jenn had this amazing t-shirt on the other day. What was that? It was failure. Jenn, what was it again?
Failure is not trying.
Failure is not trying. So basically what she's saying is you just, every time you fail, you just keep, or you think you fail. If the only failure is when you don't get up again, right? That's the essentialness of being an entrepreneur. You just keep trying.
Thank you. Get up and keep trying. You're right. You have to know how to embrace risk. Ashley, I'm going to ask you this question. Last year, you and WEKH led Indigenous roundtables across the country. And I just want to circle back to what were some of the key learnings that came out of that for us as service providers, as people supporting women entrepreneurs, and for women entrepreneurs? What key learnings came out of this, and are these going to continue in the future?
Yeah, I think a lot of the themes that we identified in the roundtables have been touched upon today by our panelists as well. We held 16 roundtables for Indigenous women entrepreneurs across the country. It was right at the beginning of COVID-19 and everything had just moved online. So it was an interesting time and it was really empowering. Every roundtable was completely different, but I'd say collectively, some themes that came out was the future of an inclusive innovation ecosystem for Indigenous women needs to be driven by Indigenous women. I think that that's something that's so important that you can apply even outside of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, really just everywhere. Indigenous women have the knowledge of what's needed in their community. They just need to be given the supports in how to make these ideas a reality. So taking into effect this notion of having an empathetic approach versus a transactional approach. Like when Patrice was talking earlier about her relationship with the banker, it's not about being transactional. It's really about being relational. That's something that's really important. Another theme that came up is related to that. It's the theme around walking alongside as opposed to like leading. So it's like redefining what leadership means. What does it mean to be a leader of women? To me, it really means, you know, that journey of walking alongside. And earlier this summer, WEKH took part in a traditional naming ceremony, and I shared with the elder a lot of the things that were shared at these roundtables. And so the traditional name we were given was Miigwech Iskwew, which means ice bear woman. So the ice bear is the polar bear, and as it was explained to me, this is the spirit of courage and resiliency, and it's a spirit that exists inside of all Indigenous women entrepreneurs, but it's also a spirit that walks alongside you.
I love that. That is incredibly powerful. And I the one piece that I love too is that to have an inclusive ecosystem, it needs to be driven by women. And so on that note, I have one final question to ask of each of you. But what is your hope? What is your hope for the future of Indigenous women entrepreneurs? And Teara, I'm going to start with you.
My hope for Indigenous women entrepreneurs is that they're thriving and in that thriving, just being their whole beautiful, amazing selves.
Jenn.
So my hope, or my definition of hope, is I describe it as being resolved in something. So I'm not just saying, yeah, let's hope that happens. Let's hope for this. I am resolving to make sure that every Indigenous woman, every Indigenous youth feels like they matter, that their business, their idea, the concept, whatever they want to build has a space in this world, and that they have everything that they need to accomplish that, and that there's so many people here ready to hold their hands and pull them up and show them the way.
Thank you, Patrice.
Yeah, mine is around being self-made and self-care. There's no such thing as self-made. We all need each other, around each other, supporting each other. And self-care. I think that you cannot go out and do it alone, and this guilt that we all have about not doing everything is ridiculous. The only way that we can really be successful in this world and be good, complete and happy in ourselves is if we have community around us. So building community to help us all succeed is where I'm hoping the direction is that we're going, and I think we are.
I think we are as well. Ashley, I'm going to give you the final word. What is your hope for Indigenous women entrepreneurs for the future? What do you see?
That, I guess it's simple, like that we just have more. It's even like just this panel today, and I talked about, the power of role models. Like, did I ever think that I myself could make skincare products or lipsticks? No, but now that these women exist, I do. Did I ever think I could buy an airplane? No. And probably in my life, I still never will, but there's a glimmer of hope in me now that thinks that I could do it because I've seen someone else do it.
Yeah, the importance of role models is so important today. And the also WEKH has got its See It, Be It campaign. If you haven't seen that, please, I encourage you to go see it. Maybe we can have someone put that in the chat for us as well. At this time, I want to thank all of you for your vulnerability, for being present with us and sharing your insights. And I want to be able to open it up to the questions that are coming in from our chat. So I'm going to ask Amanda to help me out and start us off.
Sure, thank you. And I just want to say I was tearing up a little bit there, Ashley, with your final remarks. It kind of hit me right there at the chest, because even just as a woman, I'm feeling so inspired and energized by this conversation. And so are our participants. So questions are rolling. And just a reminder, if you have a question, you can pop it in the Q&A box and we will pass it on to the panelists. So the first question is from Kim, and she would love to hear your perspective on how funders like banks or venture capitalists can support and be made aware of those who are pursuing traditional knowledge in their entrepreneurial pursuits. So how do we educate VCs and banks who we might be looking to funding for?
So I'll jump on this one real quick. So a lot of these VCs are white males, and this is kind of human nature, is that people tend to work with people that look like them and act like them. So I don't necessarily think it's our job to educate these guys. What we should be doing is creating our own ecosystem. We have money, we have resources. We just need to redefine it and create it for ourselves.
Yeah,
Great
snaps
answer.
to that. Yeah, great. So another question that came in is for the panel, do you feel like there's an alignment of Indigenous ways of knowing to feminism in the mainstream? So specifically referencing the work of Joyce Green, Making Space for Indigenous Feminism, and the key idea of Celia Harquail and CEO, which is that business and society needs to shift from masculine systems to ones that are more informed by the gender lens of women.
I'll just say really quickly that I think we just need to create more human systems, more relational systems. We need to create systems where everyone belongs, where everyone is taken care of, where everyone is thriving. And, you know, that does mean disrupting the systems that are no longer working and creating more space for those that are going to reimagine the system in a relational, equitable, loving, I will say loving way.
Funny to think that loving is a radical idea. Great. Okay, this is definitely not a planted question, but I like the idea of developing an Indigenous women-owned or women-led business ecosystem, which has to be led by women. Is this being mapped out? So Ashley, question for you.
Yeah, so this was actually my first project when I started with WEKH back in January, was mapping out the Indigenous women's ecosystem as it relates to entrepreneurship. So I can, in the chat, I'll share the link to our website where you can find this ecosystem mapping. It's not only Indigenous, it's really all of the women's entrepreneurship ecosystem across the country. But in the new year, we are working on ways to make this ecosystem mapping for Indigenous women more accessible, and just really working on developing and furthering the work that we've done in this space.
Great, thank you. Another question here about funding, which is a lot of research on women's entrepreneurship shows that women are more likely to self-fund their business, or at least at the beginning. So do you think that this is just an important part of the journey, or are there benefits of scaling up faster through funding? Is that something, and I guess the question is, would you encourage women entrepreneurs to seek out funding? What are your thoughts, panelists?
Go ahead, Jenn.
Yeah,
you and I are like,
well, this one is, yeah, that it's so hard because I knew personally for me, and I think everyone's business is different. So it depends on what you're trying to do and what the goals are for your business. But I wanted to self-fund until I could prove the concept of the business. However, looking back, you know, going and grabbing a bunch of funding first, you can really get to where you want to be a heck of a lot faster. But I firmly believed you know, as much as it looks like maybe from the outside, and that Cheekbone is just like, wow, we started here and look at where we are now. You know, I stood in our space the other day and I'm like crying because I can't believe we're like I started in my basement all by myself, you know, packaging up these orders and shipping them out. And I just hired like the 13th person, and we're in this space and we're going to make stuff that no one else is making in the world. And would I have got there either way? I can't answer that. And how fast. So it just depends how fast you want to get to where you're going, but you really learn a lot. And I think it's invaluable at some point. You learn a lot about yourself. You grow as an entrepreneur, and then you gain I feel like I'm going to say freaking a lot. You gain the confidence to actually stand in front of someone and say, look, this is what I need your money for. And, you know, this is going to be beneficial for you and I, and here's why. So it all depends. It all depends. But I believe you learn a lot when you do self-fund early on.
Absolutely. And you got to build that foundation. You have to know, to be able to grow, you have to know what you need, what you don't know. So bringing in money early can be very difficult, especially if this is your first business. I always explain to people that equity is the most expensive money that you will ever get. It's way better to even be paying a high interest rate with a bank than taking equity early on, because you're losing significant chunks of your company because your company isn't worth a lot at that point, right? So it's very easy to lose control. And also I would advise people, never, ever, 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 ever take sweat equity from people into your company. Because again, equity is incredibly expensive and it is worth way more than the wages that you should have been paying that person. So please don't give away your companies. That's it.
Okay, I have a follow-up question from my question, not in the chat box here, which is, you know, what some of the research that we see is that women businesses sometimes can be, you know, more stable or sustainable over time, right? And there seems to be kind of more of like a long haul for women-led businesses. And do you think that that is part of that like bootstrapped piece and that knowing and that education that you got in those early days where you're learning, you're making mistakes, you're building that foundation? Is that, you know, the key to that longevity, perhaps? I see some nods.
I think
we're trying to figure out who's going to answer that. Yeah.
I'll just say really quickly, and then one of my friends, please jump in. But I think it's the and. I think that the learning journey, good things take time, and awesome things in flow go quick. It's both, and you know, the entrepreneurship journey is just so very unique and sacred, and it's just like there's only one of you, and there's only one of your business that you create, and that learning just keeps happening as you go. So I think, I mean, always it's the and it's both.
Yeah, great. Okay, another question here, which is from an attendee who is in construction and building science. So very male and very Western scientific influences. Do you have any advice for leading in very male spaces as a settler Métis woman who is also cautious as she reclaims her heritage? Teara, I imagine the aviation space is quite male dominated.
Yeah, it's very male dominated, very, very, very male dominated. Like literally only 2.8%. There's something around this 3% that's I'm very suspicious about. But yeah, 2.8% of aircraft maintenance engineers in Canada are women. You know, and few more percent are pilots, but 3% of airline executives are women globally, worldwide. So yes, very male dominated industry. So if you take me at the beginning of my career, who defeminized myself, swore like a trucker, I still swear like a trucker, that stuck, to fit in, right? To not draw too much attention to myself, and to just try and survive in, you know, when you're just like one little tiny fresh fish in the great big ocean. But you know, I think you have to be proud of who you are. Like for me, like I had great big love balls at my airline launch, right? To say this belongs here. This way of leading is actually what it will take to disrupt the industry. And I don't know, if I could do it again, I don't know, but I would not try so hard to conform. I would spend my energy on disrupting and just being unwavering on who I am and proud of who I am, both as a Métis woman and as a leader in this industry. When everyone's looking at you like you're like absolutely like out of it, but you just trust yourself and you just know that actually, no, this is not only is it okay, but it's needed. And I can set down the judgment that exists as I just show up the way I am in this industry where there is not just male dominated, but like almost zero diversity, and then do everything I can to change that.
I would say find your community, find the people that are doing what you're doing and bring them together and share and have conversations, because when you have all those people behind that got your back, you're able to be stronger when you're in those uncomfortable situations. So build community. Community. It's the best.
Always good. That's so good, Patrice.
Great. So just looking at the time here, I think we might have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So if you have a burning question, pop it in the box now or forever hold your peace. And my next question is, somebody would like to know if any of you are working with business or technology advisors. And if so, is this working? Or if you have any recommendations for resources?
I got to jump on this one again. Sorry, I would be very, 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 very cautious around advisors and consultants. People come in with MBAs and they try to tell you how to run your business. First off, nobody knows your business better than you do. Nobody on the planet knows your business better than you do. So don't think that they're the expert, and if you follow their advice, you're going to be successful, because that's not true. No, most of them have never run businesses in their entire life, so they have no idea what they're talking about. I would hire a mother over an MBA any day, because moms get shit done, right? So that would be, and again, if you feel like you need a consultant to come in and get you some very specific information, lay out exactly what it is you need from them and pay them for it. Again, no sweat equity. Thanks.
And Patrice, can you just define exactly what you mean by sweat equity for those who might not be familiar with that term?
Sure. So you as an entrepreneur, you're very vulnerable, you're very short on time, and you desperately need help. There are people out there who say, oh, I'll come in and help work with your company, and I'll take a reduced salary and 5% or 10% or whatever of your company. Those guys are sharks. You want to avoid them, because again, that sweat equity is because they're not actually putting money in. It means like sweat of your brow. So the work that they're doing earns them a percentage of your company. If you are early stages, you do never want to do that. Pay them the salary and be done, so that when they're done, you can just go away. Because when you have somebody on what's called your cap table, right? Somebody has equity in your company, they're with you for the rest of your life. It is easier to get a divorce than it is to get rid of somebody from your cap table.
That's great advice. Thanks, Patrice. Any other comments on that question?
Yeah.
Also, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jenn.
I was just like, so there's a lot of things that I don't know how to do. And I'm really adamant and open about telling people that's pretty much everything. Like, I have not been in the beauty industry before. I do not know chemistry or science or how to create formulations at all. I know it's for a lipstick, it's an oil, a wax, and a pigment, and you blend it all together. But we certainly had a hard time making that work until we finally got the formulation right this August. So it's not as simple and cut and dry. So I firmly believe in hiring people that know the specific skills, or when you need that technical work done, for sure, to hire that support as early on and as possible, so you can avoid very expensive mistakes later on.
Yeah, but to be clear, I have an accountant and a bookkeeper and all those people who actually have skills that I don't. But yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jenn.
Yeah. Well, and it's just too about, there's a lot of people that, because they're, for instance, I'm giving you a real life story here. The first chemist that we work with doesn't know crap about scalable formulations, meaning she can make it in a pot, yay, right? In her little tiny lab, But when it came to, we need this to scale to a 50 gram or 50 kg formulation, like the product was coming out terribly. So she's not an expert. She's never worked in the industry at the scale that we needed her to be able to do that. But she has 2 university degrees that says she's a chemist. So you just have to be very, very careful. And the more you learn, the better questions you get to ask people.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions before we close it out. First question, what role can men play in building an inclusive ecosystem? I never like to give men cookies, but we need them too.
We need everybody to be able to shift the systems. We need everybody, and to, you know, hopefully, you know, what we do is recognize those that are underrepresented or have unique challenges and barriers and uplift them. But we really need everybody in the system to be creating it better together.
Great. Okay, our last question, Patrice, can you share a little bit about your experience with Dragon's Den?
Sure. So both Jen and I have been on Dragon's Den. So I'll just give you the quick Coles notes. Dragon's Den, they actually called me, asked me to come and be on the show, did a quick audition, went in there. A lot of things that people don't know is that only about 60% of the people that are recorded, like they do a session, actually make it to air. So what you want to be, it's infotainment, a reality television. It's not a business show per se. It's supposedly about business, but it's not really about business. It's about entertaining people. You're in there, so only about 60% of the people make it to air. If you do go on the show, and Jen actually broke this rule that I was told by an ex-producer, which was to always say yes to whatever deal they give you, because then that dragon will advocate for you to be on the show. Jen said no, which was totally awesome, because the deals are so skewed to the dragons, they're ridiculous. Like most people who even accept on air, they say no later, which I did. Because you don't want to get in a relationship with someone and have somebody having equity in your company after talking to these guys for like an hour. Like it's a marriage, right? So this idea that going on Dragon's Den and getting X number of dollars is what's going to help move your business forward, that's not how you get financing. What you get from Dragon's Den is marketing. And that's exactly how you have to look at it. Also, another thing that most people don't know is they make you sign a contract that they can edit this however they want to. So they can actually change what you say and what they say based on the editing process. I was talking to them for over 45 minutes down to I think about 5-6 minutes. So you get an idea that you really get a lot of manipulation happening there. So again, it's marketing, it's not financing. That's what I would say about Dragon's Den.
Well, that's great advice. And so I think we'll put a pin in it there. And Shannon, I'll pass the baton back to you to introduce Tabatha Bull from CCAB.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for your incredible energy and again, your wisdom. You know, I often have spoken about community, and you just really put that message back home for me today, just the importance of community. But what I really love was the notion that we have to help our future generation of Indigenous women entrepreneurs to be proud and to know who they are, and what great examples you are in that. So thank you. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Tabatha Bull, President and CEO of CCAB, to provide closing remarks today. Tabatha is an Anishinaabe and a proud member of Nipissing First Nation near North Bay, Ontario. In 2018, she joined CCAB as the Chief Operating Officer, and today she is President and CEO, working with Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal businesses to help strengthen a prosperous Indigenous economy and Canadian market. She is also a member of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce Board and is committed to working with members to improve business competitiveness across all industry sectors. Tabatha, welcome.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you all of you. Hi to Jenn and Patrice, Teara, and Ashley. It's so good to see all of you, and I must say it was so good to sit and actually really listen and not be talking. You know, I know that this is a lot of vulnerable and very honest questions that were asked of you, and I can't thank you enough for really opening up, as you always do, to share your experiences and help support other Indigenous women and entrepreneurs, and also help us learn about what is needed and what the barriers are. You are all incredible advocates, and really do help CCAB and myself in understanding what I need to be advocating for and working towards. So Miigwech to all of you. I also really want to thank everyone for coming today. I was able to really watch the chat and all the comments from everybody attending, and there were some really great comments of appreciation for this session, and some really exciting and interesting questions, which, you know, sometimes that silence of waiting for questions and not having them can be difficult for a moderator. So thank you to being such active participants today. And Shannon, thank you for your really thoughtful questions and consideration of everyone here, and really looking into the history of their businesses. Of course, to my team, Sam and Kaira, I know this work that we're doing to really deep dive into specifically looking at gender lens at the research that we're doing is something that we're all really feel that is important, and something that's been lacking in Indigenous research and business research in general. So looking at next year, we will be doing a deeper dive with our partners at WEKH, and we're so pleased to be able to work on this partnership on a number of different facets, looking from a gender base at how we can improve this situation and create the conditions, as Teara says, for Indigenous women to thrive. So please stay tuned for future research and announcements in 2021. And come back and attend these events and ask your questions. Please reach out to any of us if you have other suggestions on research that we can be doing, specifically looking at women entrepreneurs and how we can ensure that, you know, we have the right information so that we can continue to advocate for policy and develop programs. So a huge, really big thank you, Miigwech, merci to everyone for being here, and to everyone who made this report launch and this webinar happen. And I'll send it back to you, Shannon, for your final goodbye.
Thank you, Tabatha. So great to have you join us today. And we are now at the end of our webinar. So I want to give a huge thank you to CCAB for the research that you've done, and to Samantha, Kaira, and Tabatha for all of you joining us today. To our amazing panelists, Teara, Ashley, Patrice, and Jenn, for participating and sharing your experiences. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for tuning in. We know that time is precious, and so thank you. The report, Breaking Barriers, A Decade of Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship in Canada, is now available on the WEKH website as well as the CCAB website. And so thank you, Miigwech, all, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.